Imagine a world where the torrential rain that turned the fields of Waterloo into a muddy quagmire had, instead, held off for just a few more hours. A world where Marshal Grouchy had, against all odds, arrived with his 30,000 French troops to reinforce Napoleon's flank. What if the decisive charge of the British cavalry had been repelled? What if the thundering advance of the Prussian army, led by Marshal Blucher, had been met with a French victory? The Battle of Waterloo was one of the closest and most pivotal conflicts in human history. A single change, a single stroke of luck, could have reversed the outcome. In our history, Napoleon Bonaparte's defeat at Waterloo marked the end of his reign and the collapse of the First French Empire. It ushered in a century of relative peace in Europe and cemented the British Empire as the world's dominant superpower. But what if the little corporal had won? This is not just a story of a single battle, it is a profound journey into a world where a continent, and indeed the planet, was reshaped by a single man's ambition. This is a look at a world under the shadow of the Napoleonic eagle, an age of Bonapartism that would have fundamentally altered the course of human history. The new continental system, a Europe forged in victory. A French victory at Waterloo would have been a devastating blow to the Seventh Coalition. With the combined British and Prussian armies shattered, the other Allied forces, the Austrians and Russians, would have been forced to withdraw and seek a new peace treaty. The terms of that treaty would have been dictated by Napoleon, and they would have been harsh. He would have re-established his dominance over Central Europe, and the dream of a unified Germany and Italy would have been postponed for a century or more. The Holy Roman Empire, already dismantled, would have been replaced by a new, more enduring French-dominated confederation of client states. With Europe under his heel, Napoleon's primary focus would have turned to his most persistent and formidable enemy, Great Britain. The British, their army in tatters and their allies defeated, would have been forced to the negotiation table. The continental system, Napoleon's long-standing economic blockade of Britain, would have become a crushing reality. With every port in Europe closed to British trade, and with French control over the Mediterranean, the British economy would have collapsed. Facing internal pressure from a failing economy and a humiliated military, the British government would have had no choice but to surrender, ending the Napoleonic Wars on Napoleon's terms. The British Empire, while still vast, would be an isolated maritime power, its global dominance challenged by a new, powerful French Empire. The consequences of this victory would have been immediate and profound. Napoleon would have consolidated his power, not as a short-lived emperor, but as the new master of Europe. He would have used his victory to entrench his rule, purging any remaining opposition and establishing a new, more enduring dynasty. The world would not have been defined by British naval supremacy, but by a balance of power between a powerful French Empire on the continent and a humbled British Empire on the seas. This new world order would be a tense, but stable, one, with the two great powers vying for global influence, but without the constant wars that defined our history. The stage would be set for an age of Bonapartism, a period where the legacy of Napoleon would shape every aspect of European life. The age of Bonapartism, a cultural and political legacy. A victorious Napoleon would not just have been a military conqueror, he would have been a political and cultural force that shaped the 19th and 20th centuries. His Napoleonic Code, a system of civil law that enshrined principles of equality and meritocracy, would have been the legal standard across Europe. This would have led to a more modern, efficient, and standardized legal system, replacing the feudal and arbitrary laws of the past. The legacy of this code would be a more rational and meritocratic society, one where an individual's success is determined by their talent, not by their birthright. The administrative system he created, a centralized bureaucracy with a clear chain of command and a focus on efficiency, would have been the model for governments across Europe. The German states, the Italian peninsula, and even the nations of Eastern Europe would have adopted this system, creating a new, more modern form of governance. The spirit of Bonapartism would be a powerful political ideology, one that combines the central authority of a strong man with the revolutionary ideals of equality and meritocracy. This would have led to a new kind of European politics, one that is less focused on dynastic rule and more on the power of a single, decisive leader. The great European monarchies, once a powerful force, would have become relics of the past. The cultural impact would have been equally profound. French would have become the undisputed language of diplomacy, culture, and science, replacing English and German as the lingua franca of the Western world. French art, literature, and philosophy would have dominated the cultural landscape, and Paris would have been the undisputed center of the Western world. The United States, while still a growing power, would be a secondary force on the world stage, its culture and politics defined by the new, powerful European giant. The world would have been a more French-centric place, with a unified, modern, and powerful Europe at its heart. The legacy of Napoleon, in this timeline, would not be that of a failed conqueror, but that of a visionary leader who, through force and sheer will, forged a new, more modern world. An American empire, the unchecked Republic of French victory at Waterloo would have had a profound and immediate impact on the United States. In our timeline, the War of 1812 was fought against a powerful British Empire that was also fighting a war against Napoleon. The US was able to hold its own against a distracted British military, but a French victory at Waterloo would have created a very different reality. With Britain defeated, Napoleon's powerful navy would have been a force to be reckoned with. The British, humbled and seeking new allies, would have been more willing to negotiate, and the Treaty of Ghent would have been far more favorable to the United States. More importantly, the United States, without a powerful British Empire to constrain it, would have been free to pursue a more aggressive and expansionist foreign policy. The Louisiana Purchase, which in our history was a great and peaceful expansion of territory, would have been a prelude to a more aggressive campaign of westward expansion. With no British forces in the Northwest Territories and no Spanish or French forces to worry about, the US would have been able to expand its borders more freely. The United States, in this timeline, might have become a continental empire decades earlier, its westward expansion unburdened by the geopolitical constraints of our history. The absence of a powerful British rival would have also had a profound impact on American culture and politics. The United States would have developed its own distinct identity, one that is not defined by its rivalry with Great Britain. The American political system, with no foreign threat to unite it, might have been more prone to internal divisions. The issue of slavery, which was a constant source of tension in our history, might have led to a more immediate and violent conflict. The United States, in this timeline, would be a more powerful, more aggressive, and more internally divided nation, one that is not a beacon of democracy, but a fledgling empire in its own right. The world would be a more dangerous, and more unpredictable, place, with two new, powerful empires, one French, one American, vying for control. This timeline, where a single battle was won, shows us the profound and often hidden consequences of historical contingency. It is a world where the power of one man, Napoleon Bonaparte, was able to reshape the entire course of human history. It is a world where a continent, and indeed the planet, was forged in the fires of a single victory. But it is also a world of new conflicts, new rivalries, and a new, more dangerous political landscape. The paradox of this timeline is that Napoleon, a dictator who ruled through force and coercion, would have brought a new kind of political and social order to Europe, one that was more modern, more rational, and more meritocratic. The world would be a more French-centric, and more Napoleonic, place, but at the cost of the freedom and self-determination of nations. This is a powerful, and deeply moving, look at a world that could have been, and a reminder that history is not a foregone conclusion, but a series of choices, both big and small, that shape our world. What do you think would have been the legacy of a Napoleonic empire that lasted for a century? How would a French-dominated Europe have changed the course of the 20th century and the two world wars? Would a British empire, humbled by Napoleon, have been more or less aggressive in its quest for a global empire? If you want to keep exploring the what-ifs and see how our world could be different, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Timeline Shift, and get ready for our next adventure.